stage 2, 8.77 miles. Hey, please note, we're not in until 45. But if you write 45 and let us go early, we can start catching up with the group. He's getting the grass out.
Oh,
Thanks.
Yep. I've tried to defrost, but it's not working.
Yeah, we have no... That means you have to defrost with heat.
Got it.
Can you give us 45?
I'll give you 45 if you want it.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Do I have time to put my gloves on?
45.
Yeah. Sorry, our window just fogged up. We had a bit of an adventure,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Pulled a little bit of dirt and mud out, but there's still
Yeah,
some more.
thank you.
Okay, it's not this
1
one, it's
minute,
the next
yeah.
one. There's a countdown clock. Can you see it, or do you want me to count you down?
Oh, we can see it.
Okay. Thank you. Next. Armed. You okay?
It's a bit spooked.
Yep.
What, really?
Wow. Yeah.
Have him take a picture of it.
Can you take a picture of that? Thanks.
Okay, we're 15.
Yep.
Down as soon as this is finished defrosting, I need it. Okay.
Okay, but it's on heat right now.
Something.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. 70, left 5 plus. 50. Right 5 plus 50. Left 5 long. Right 6, right 4 plus. Beat right 4 plus.
Now the surface is sippy, so I'm just gonna.
Huh?
I'm not gonna push it because.
I know, but just don't pussy put it.
I'm
Right
not.
5 off camber into crest 100. Right 6 over small crest long, 50. We didn't hit any of the wheels.
Feels like it.
No, it's just the skid plate. Left 6. Left 5 plus over crest long. Into right 4 minus. Into small crest 50.
Right to a minus.
Yes. Left 5 minus opens over small crest 70. Brake left 3 plus long loose. 50. Right 5 minus over small crest opens long 70. Right 5 over small crest tightens over small crest opens long. Left 6 into small crest.
Next.
Into right 5 opens over crest 50. Small crest 50. Left 5 plus. Left 5 over crest tightens 4 minus very loose down 50. Turn left 2 minus. Right 5 plus, tightens 4 plus, over crest 50. into left 4 minus. Right 5 opens over crest, tightens. Left 6 tightens, 70. Right 4 plus long, stay in, loose. Opens long over crest. 70, small crest. Into stay left, or into left 4 plus, stay in, loose. Right 5 plus, into right 5 plus again. Left 6. Into right 5 over small crest, tightens over small crest, long. Opens, tightens 5 minus. Left 4 plus over small crest, 50.
Right.
Okay. Again. Left 3. Oh, that was left 3 plus. Right 5 plus long over small crest. Tightens 4 plus long over double crest over rocks. Is that fogging up
No.
in here? Or is it just outside? Okay. 50. Left 5 plus short over small crest into right 4 plus. 70. Right 4 opens over small crest. Tightens 4 minus. What's it doing?
It's bouncing there.
Okay. Left 6 over small crest, tightens 5 minus. Right 5 minus, opens, tightens over small crest. Into left 4 long, opens, 50. Right 4 loose, long, opens over crest. Or rather, crest, over crest opens. Left 5 plus long. Into caution, left 3 minus loose. Left 5 minus. Into right 5 plus. 50. Could it be a tire? Stay, caution, stay right over crest. Left 4 plus down. Okay. go 70. Right 6 plus. Left 6 plus. Kinks 200. Right 6, long, over, off camber, tightens 5 minus, over crest. Into left 4 minus. I think we lost our skid plate, or the underbody. It's no longer making the noise.
Well, let's not so deep yet. We may have just warmed some of it off.
This is left 4 minus. Left 5 minus, into right 5 plus, 70, crest. Left 6, 50. Right 6 plus. Left 5 plus. Into right 4 plus, loose.
Right 4 plus.
Yes. Into left 4 plus long. Right 3 plus long. Left 4 loose. So which side is bouncing? Into right 5 plus. Over small crest opens.
Right.
Into small crest 120. small crest into right 5. Into turn right 5 plus loose long. Jump into right 5 plus. 100. Left 6, tightens 5, down. Into right 5 long, tightens 4 plus 50. Left 6 plus 100. Left 5, into right 5 plus 200. Left 5, tightens 4 plus. Into right 5 minus, no cut. Tightens 4 plus, into right 5 minus, no cut. Left 6, 200. Left 5, very long, loose. Into crest. Into right 5 minus. Brake, dip into bridge. Repeat, brake, dip into bridge. Right 5 plus. Into 4 plus. 100. Repeat, 5 plus, tightens 4 plus, 100. Left 5 plus, very long. Right 5 minus 50. Caution, right 5 minus, over bridge, tightens 3. Left 5 long, opens, 50. Right 6, 100. Left 5 minus, opens, 120. Left 6 plus, 70. Right 5 minus, extra long, over small crest, 150.
Say again.
Extra long, right 5 extra long, over small crest, 150. Left 5 minus, extra long, 100. Less than mile. Right 6, 100. Left 4 plus, very long, 150. Right 5 minus, opens, tightens, 4 plus, very long. Repeat, right 5 minus, opens, tightens, 4 plus, very long. Left 5, tightens, opens, extra long, go, 50. Repeat, left 5, tightens, opens, extra long, go, 50. Left 6 plus, right 6 plus. Right 6 plus, 50. Left 6, finish, 350. Good job. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Straight over.
Straight.